Yes, yeah. So you did receive the book, I think, or did you
I
receive?
did. I read the whole thing.
Yeah, oh, wonderful.
Yeah, no, your book was amazing.
Multi-level marketing is this multi-headed monster, and it is approached by various disciplines. Um, and I've been involved in all of them at one time or another. Are the products viable? Is there retail sales? Does anybody make money? Is it legal? And so on. And as I approached it and looked at all these subjects, file folders that I've organized all this in, it came back to me kind of a theme that I always knew, that each time I would talk with someone, I would realize I would come up against this reality so basic. It was so obvious. In a way, it became invisible,
Mm-hmm.
which is, what is multi-level marketing? What is it? It's a phenomenon. It's global. When did it start? And how do you what do you call it? Much of the commentary has been about what it's not. It's not direct selling. People really can't make money selling these products. Not an income opportunity because the data is clear. Less than 1% make any money in a year. And over multiple years, it becomes a percent of 1%. So this is not qualified as an opportunity. Okay, well then what is it? And could it even still be called a business? If it's not a business, what do you name it? And that became sort of the guiding theme, you might say, the question that I wanted to stay close to as I tracked its history, as its design, how it actually works, the pay plan, then the political side of it, the legal and political side of it, its history through the courts, its political influence buying, which is extremely extensive, and finally, this larger question that people have been confronting, is this a cult? And if it is a cult, what do you call that? What is it? What kind of cult?
That's right.
So there was this basic question that media often, particularly news journalists, skip right over and don't even realize that they have skipped over. And they presume it's a business, presume it's direct selling, presume that it's an income opportunity. They think of people, quote, joining it or pursuing it like you would a career or a real job and so on. And, breaking away from that and getting back to the basic question, they almost don't have time to do that. And what I discovered too, and I describe this in the book, if you take them back to the fundamentals and remind them that they're operating on unexamined premises, that even with a cursory, more careful look, explodes those premises, they realize they can't print what's actually there. Their story is kind of based on this fairy tale. And if you take the fairy tale away and get to the truth, it raises all kinds of disturbing, almost unprintable realities.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's such a deep well. It's such a deep mine to go down, because there are so many different factors or elements to the picture. And I'm glad that you mentioned, it's almost a point of first principles in a way, because there is this assumption made on the part of almost everyone who is presented with this. And it is a fallacy. I mean, it's that bias we have of the first time we hear about something, that tends to be how we will continue to frame it in our mind and how we will think about it. Even if we're told later, it's actually not that, it's something different. You still have this kind of basic fundamental idea of what this thing is, and you can't help cognitively but frame everything you hear and see about that thing later against that first idea that you had. And in this case, I believe what we have is a misnomer where, or you know, how propaganda, because these things are presented as quote unquote business opportunities. And that immediately sets in your mind, it's a business. And it's kind of clubby. It's kind of a membership sort of, you know, groupie, clubby kind of thing. So it involves, you know, social networking too. But that business term hits right away. And so you're instantly framing everything against that idea and you categorize it accordingly. But that is the very first lie connected with this whole thing.
Yes. And it's this is, as you said, first principle, fundamental, but it's also extremely intentional. This didn't happen by accident. This is not just a misapprehension of people, or we kind of got it wrong, popular misconception. This was very carefully cultivated. It was with very specialized language. So the language of business has been used here. That's the basic language of it. And that language has been driven into the market as a disguise for what is going on behind it, with great intention and with a high degree of sophistication. Wordsmiths are at work here. Very high paid PR companies are used. There is a national organization with an office on K Street that is kind of the Ministry of Truth for multi-level marketing.
And what is that office? Who are those?
That is the Direct Selling Association, DSA. And DSA has gone through several name changes. It used to be the trade organization of actual direct selling companies, that actually went out and called on homes, sewing machine companies, vacuum cleaner companies, cosmetic companies, and so on. And there were many of them. Fuller Brush Company. I was interviewed by a young journalist who said, what is Fuller Brush? And well, anybody my age or maybe somewhat younger, this is an iconic company, an iconic thing of salespeople that would come to your home, talk to your mother, this would be from my point of view, and come in the house, a man, and the mother was, you know, by herself in the house. The guy would come in with a briefcase or a suitcase full of goods, catalog, and so on. And everything stopped for the Fuller Brush man to, and it was always a man too, and sold these goods, and you took orders. And in the book, I do discuss this, and because there was actually quite a good article written a long time ago about the actual number of homes a Fuller Brush man had to call on, what was the average amount they earned per sale. It was a grueling, tough work, but such a thing existed, and they had a trade association. But that organization was, over time, these kinds of businesses faded away. People weren't at home, right? You didn't need them. All these things were in stores. Later, they could be ordered online or in catalogs with mail order, now online. And so absolutely no need. And nor would anyone allow a salesperson to come knocking at your door, a stranger, into the house. Not many people are at home to begin with. They're at work themselves, and so on. The model is completely gone. Yet, that organization was sort of, the shell of it was taken over by this new thing called multi-level marketing companies, characterized by companies like Amway, Nu Skin, Herbalife, and so on.
That's right.
And they adopted that whole identity. They sort of stole the identity, yeah, an original identity theft. And so they took on the entire demeanor of direct selling, even though, again, the idea that you would sell something going door to door is an absurdity today. And it isn't totally gone away. There are a few things, home improvement products, home improvement services, contractors, people that put in all new windows or remodel your bathroom or your kitchen. They still come out to your house and so on and do a pitch. But nobody does it on the scale with commodity goods anymore, with little.
It just occurred to me where we see that now, where that model has sort of transferred. And even now, at this point, as you and I sit here talking in 2021, I believe this model is fading now. Home shopping network.
Yes, home shopping network.
It basically took the sales pitch that the guy would go into your house and do, including product demonstration.
Yes.
And they put it on TV.
Put it on
TV. And they sort of centralized it. And now, and even now, that itself is sort of fading, going by the way of the dodo. So the whole concept of direct selling is really, really going the way of the dodo in many, many ways.
It went away quite a long time. The model of millions or thousands of people taking on this as an occupation, full-time or part-time, is a fantasy. It's a kind of sentimental fantasy, but they get away with it. They've been getting away with it and talking about 1 million or 400,000 Americans selling weight loss powder.
Yep.
How could 400,000 people have a market? I mean, there wouldn't be enough customers. And that question is just passed right over, and so on. And how would they keep their customer from all those other competitive salespeople? So,
right. Well, your book,
yes.
Let's name it, because I want people to know. It's Ponzinomics.
Yes. So I had to invent, in a way, I had to invent a word to communicate what I found multi-level marketing to be. Now, Ponzinomics, the term I created, is a belief system. And it could and does cover more than multi-level marketing. But multi-level marketing is sort of the avant-garde of it. It most perfectly and directly represents this belief system. And that's what I came to, as I said, is this central question: what is it? Right. I had to set aside all the things I know that it's not. That's been demonstrated by many other people besides me. Not direct selling, not income opportunity, not even really a business, because almost no one, there's people get into it under misconceptions. So they have been misled when they get into it. Well, that can't be a business. If you're misled, then you're not voluntarily entering into a contract. And then second, there really is not an exchange of value. People expect income. They expect an opportunity to sell product. They don't get that.
That's right.
So, okay, so not a business, not direct selling. What is it? Eventually, I concluded it's a belief. It's a belief system that is attached to a pyramid scheme proposition. And so it doesn't qualify as a business opportunity, but it is a financial proposition. But it's not just an ordinary one-off financial proposition. It's a belief system. A proposition is part of a much larger belief system. The belief system had two aspects to it. One is the Ponzi, that is the robbing Peter to pay Paul, is presented as viable, doable, sustainable. And then from that, because it offers this utopian opportunity, income, of financial, it is then presented even on a wider scale as a kind of answer to life's questions, most basic questions: livelihood, fulfillment, success,
even sociality.
And that's right, community, personal development, realizing your full potential. And from there, these things are presented as almost mystical. It becomes almost a mysterious secret society that you can join, that not only uplifts you and allows you to develop fully as a person, but it even provides you this magnificent income opportunity. Well, who wouldn't want that, right? So, and this is going on a grand scale. Millions and millions of people are exposed to this proselytizing. So it is like the fastest growing religion in the country, if you want to think of it.
You know, I'm so glad that you just summarized it that way, because I wanted to present my audience with an analogy or comparison here to think with, because it's so, it can be difficult for people to break away from those first principles or first assumptions, right? And
Yes.
and I want to offer my audience an analogy that will make total sense, I think, and that is, we talk about Scientology. We talk about cults like the Church of Scientology, and the Church of Scientology is not a church any more than MLMs are a business.
Yes.
And that's actually the level of deception that we're talking about. And it's and as you've mentioned here, it's not accidental. This is very, very intent driven.
Well, it's embedded in the language. If you describe Scientology with the term the Church of Scientology,
That's right.
and then tell me it's not a church, I'm
Right?
confused.
That's
Didn't
right.
you just call it a church?
Exactly. And really it comes down to, is it a religion? And that is that is a question I will have no problem debating academics about. And I know that they have valid points to make. If you believe that L. Ron Hubbard was sincere, and if you believe that the Church of Scientology is operating as a religious organization first to forward a religious movement, then you could believe that the Church of Scientology is a valid church or a valid religion. But the fact of the matter is that it's wordplay. And we all kind of, when you get into the depths of Scientology, you learn pretty quickly how that actually works and how it is what we call religious cloaking. It's a facade. It's the using the language to give themselves an air of legitimacy and credibility that they actually don't deserve and never earned. And I believe this is a perfectly accurate analogy for any multi-level marketing company being considered a quote-unquote business.
Let's just go a little deeper with that, comparing multi-level marketing with Scientology or a religion. So let's stay with it, comparing it to a religion or a religious movement or a religious-like movement of some kind.
Sure.
One of the few people who ever actually did look at multi-level marketing objectively in a scholarly way was a Yale law professor named Arthur Leff, who I quote quite extensively in the book. Now, Arthur Leff was most famous for an analysis of contract laws and the philosophy of contracts, and he's quite well known for an essay that he wrote about, is there such a thing as a law kind of based on nature, or do we make up law? Is there any kind of a way to determine a law that would be intrinsic, or a moral law? So he's best known for that, but he did work in the 70s with the Federal Trade Commission as a consultant. And this was before the famous Amway decision. So back when the Federal Trade Commission looked at these things, and this was also before the term multi-level marketing had been invented by multi-level marketing companies. It was called pyramid selling. And that was the term.
About to ask you, is that it was called pyramid selling before this?
Pyramid selling. That's not what the schemes called themselves. They called themselves, well, they actually didn't have one term they used. They called themselves sales companies, direct selling companies. And they claimed that everybody in it was selling, and that this was very much still living off the disguise of the old direct selling world, that obsolete, extinct, they were still living on that. But regulators in the 70s and late 60s who began to take notice of this, they called them pyramid selling. That was the term. That was the common term used. And they were being prosecuted, and states were writing laws to ban them as inherently fraudulent. During that time,
we're talking about the 60s and 70s now.
That's right. The late 60s is when the government first began looking at this model. It had been operating for more than 15 years already, and hundreds of thousands of people had been enrolled. But this was when Amway first began its growth. Amway started around 1960, 61. And so the first laws started being written in the late 60s. The most famous anti-MLM law, or anti-endless chain, that was the other term used, endless chain, the infinite chain, was California's law, and that was passed in 1968. So there were a few right around that time. So from multi-level marketing was born in 1945 and gained, but it didn't really take off into a big way until the 60s. And by 68, the government was starting to prosecute them. Okay. So during this time, up to the mid 70s, Arthur Leff did this work. Dr. Leff did this work for the Federal Trade Commission, and he was writing a book, a most unusual book about the world of selling, what actually is going on in a sale. And he realized that, you know, there are earlier cultures where virtually nothing was sold. People obtained it, but there really was no marketing side to it. And people had currencies, but there still was very little sales going on. You bought because you absolutely needed it for survival. You had very little other cash to be buying anything with. So there really was not a world of selling. Today, we are immersed in sales and marketing and advertising, PR. And so he actually says, but what actually is occurring here? What is the messaging that is going on for something to be declared a sale? In the course of this, he looked at various cons, and he determined that to understand selling, you had to understand con games, because essentially the players were the same. The customer, the salesman versus the con artist and the mark. They actually had the same challenges. They had to say, I have a proposition for you. I personally have access to an opportunity you can't get from anywhere else. I need you because I'm going to benefit from it. And this benefit that I'm going to offer you has to have some plausible reason. I'm going to offer you 10% discount, 20%, or 100, 80% discount. I have to be able to tell you, how can I do that? Where does that money come from that I was able to pass on to you in the way of this big savings? It has to come from somewhere. Salesmen can't say, I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart. Nobody will buy that. So he looked at multi-level marketing, which he considered the biggest con of the era of that period. Of course, he's passed on now, and of course, it is multiple scale bigger than it ever was back then. So he could never have imagined that, I think. But he did see it as a massive thing already. And he classified it as a spectacle, a con that is done on a vast scale, that can be done over a long period of time and touch and con literally millions of people. And so he bumped into, of course, the people would say, well, what are you talking about? What else is such a thing? Well, of course, he was referring to religious cons, right? So this required him to define, well, when is religion a con and when is it sincere and real? Because a con man can get in front of a large audience and tell them, give me your money and I'll make sure you go to heaven, right? Mm-hmm. And people do that all the time, right?
They do, and especially with the rise of televangelism.
Yeah, and multi-level marketing is saying, give me your money and I'll take you to heaven here on earth. Success, fulfillment, happiness, community, unlimited potential, unlimited income, enlightenment, and so on. It's the same con. So, but when is religion not a con? And ultimately, what he determined was, in the case of religion, there was an element of sincerity, of belief on both sides, the preacher and the congregation. They might give their money. He might claim that if they gave money to the cause, that it would aid them in getting grace or reach into some level of blessedness or something like that. But that doesn't make it a con. That's a mutual thing. And who can prove that it was wrong, right? You can't. But there are a couple of other manifestations of a con religion. Usually the preacher that is asking for the money is taking it all for himself or herself. There's one side of it.
That's the part I was going to bring up.
Yes. Secondly, there's no check or balance on this preacher. They are kind of self-appointed and so on. There's, an element that says, is this really a religion? Because there's got to be some mutuality here of responsibility between the preacher and the congregation. And then, of course, third element is the preacher is not doing what he says. He's not following the moral precepts. He's often violating that. He's spending money, profligately. He's engaging in sexual affairs after, admonishing people against that, and so on. He's engaged in shady business deals, self-dealing, and so that would be the elements that would, determine. But what he said is, but notice how close they are. You see, in the case of a religion, it's kind of a value call here of when it crosses over into a spectacle con rather than a sincere. Multi-level marketing is kind of the same thing. How can a guy up on the stage telling you about positive thinking, realizing your success, making more of your life, when does that turn over into a con?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that we might mention here that's coming to mind right away is the fact that, was it Wisconsin or Illinois that did the state audit?
Right.
Right.
Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin. Yeah. They did a state audit from the state AG office on the top sellers of the Amway, the people who get on stage and talk about how they're successful, winning, affluent, best life ever. And wasn't it the case that they were all broke?
They were all broke, yes. Less than 1% made any money at all. Yeah. And then even that 1%, after they showed the tax returns of those people, they were losing money too after their expenses were accounted for. I think that the dividing line is pretty obvious in the case of multi. You can be as positive, you can preach positive thinking, confidence building, sharing, community, all good, until you say, and here's the plan for realizing all of these ideals. Now that plan is something that can be examined and determined, is it a real thing? And there is abundant evidence now that in the multi-level marketing, while they talk these wonderful positive ideals, it all gets funneled eventually into a contract for a particular business scheme, so-called business. That scheme is demonstrably unfair and deceptive. So that's where it's obvious. It's as somebody else has said to me, you can tell people about angels. You can believe that there are angels. You can argue that there are angels. Fine. Nobody can disprove that. But if I bring you a feather from an angel and actually try to sell it to you, now I've crossed into the area of a fraud. So that's kind of what multi-level marketing does. It brings you the feather of the angel and says, here, pay this. And you turn out, of course, the feather came from a bird, not an angel. So That's really what they've sold you something that is not a business, that's not an income opportunity, it's not direct selling. It is in fact an endless chain scheme. It's a pyramid selling scheme. There is buy-sell transactions going on, but that doesn't make it a business.
Exactly.
So,
Especially when the fact is that, when you do an audit of this, or you do a financial, a real run the numbers kind of analysis, and you have done that, I have now done that. We've spoken with economists and economic analysis who actually do understand how numbers work, and they've broken this down for us, and it's abundantly clear that there isn't a path. There is no path to success. It is not a matter of, okay, there's just a bunch of wimps who aren't willing to work hard, and us few who are willing to work hard, and we're the ones who are going to, visualize, we're going to see that profit. That's going to happen for us. You learn in doing a deep dive into this and really seeing the mechanics of how this stuff works across the domain. This isn't a matter of just Amway. This is Herbalife. This is Amway. This is Tupperware. This is every single one of these models will lose you everything. And it is so hard to get that across to people because they see the yachts and the planes, the G6s and the stages and the lights, and they go, well, somebody's paying for all this. Money must be somewhere here. And
there is a lot of money involved.
And there is a lot of money, exactly. How does this facade get created, and how are people convinced to buy into this so heavily?
One of the terrible revelations that occurred to some people in multi-level marketing that was chronicled in books, first-person books, sort of memoir books about their experience. Stephen Butterfield's book, Ruth Carter's book, Eric Scheibler's book, and so on. There have been a few others. What they discovered was that some of the people on the stage who were displaying their wealth, bragging about their wealth, the vacation their family had gone on, their luxury car they're driving, and so on, from the business, they said. Turned out that money that they did have didn't even come from selling the product. It came from running the motivation event. In other words, people paid $100 to come to an event to hear about how great the income opportunity is in multi-level marketing. The guy on the stage said, I'm living proof of it. Here's how I live. Only to discover that the real money came from the $100 they had paid to hear that message, not from the business.
Exactly.
So it's that old thing, about sending out the ad. I'll show you how to make $1,000, and you send me $1, and I'll tell you how to do it. And you send in the $1, and you get a note back that says, run an ad in which you promise people you show them how to make $1,000.
Right, that's right. Send me. What is it? I want to highlight a point here, and we might revisit this list as we go through this episode here. I'm not trying to check all the boxes, but it occurs to me from what we've talked about so far that comparisons can and absolutely should be made between the characteristics or the modeling that's been done of how thought reform, or in other words, brainwashing, if you want to go, vulgar, but thought reform, mental manipulation, these are things, and there are tools for it. Language is one of them. Emotion is another one. Logical fallacies. There are a whole array of ways that you go about doing this. But the fact that you're doing it as an organization, as an individual, indicates that there is something undue going on, something wrong, something not above the boards. And one of those points that we've brought up so far that I wanted to highlight is what's called mystical manipulation. This is one of the 8 points from Robert Lifton's model of thought reform. And it's the manipulation of experiences that appears spontaneous, but is in fact planned and orchestrated by the group or its leaders to demonstrate, in this case, some exceptional talent or insight that sets the leader or group apart from the rest of humanity and allows a reinterpretation of events so that this group is all and everybody else doesn't really get it, doesn't really understand, isn't really in on the secret knowledge, right? Which is another factor, the sacred science of it. So I wanted to point that up because it's an important aspect of this, and of course relates to why I'm interested in this stuff.
Yes, and I spent quite a bit of time in the book on Ponzinomics. Ponzinomics is a belief system. Again, it's a belief system. Integral to the belief system is the belief, the delusional belief that a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid, an endless chain, I recruit 5, they recruit 25, and so on, is workable, and that it's an opening, and it creates a possibility for a unique and extraordinary income stream. The income stream then makes your life extraordinary. You'll now be free from work, free with time. You'll be able to do amazing things that you had only dreamed of before. Your life will be transformed. So that's all included in this. So, of course, this is a con. Of course, start with the premise that the Ponzi pyramid structure is completely unsustainable. But the question is, why would they need such an extensive thought reform process that you see in all multi-level marketing companies? And well, part of the answer is they're looking to take your money deceptively. They can't allow critical thinking, due diligence, comparative shopping, and so on, the normal things that you do in business. Can't allow that. Second thing is it's a long con. This isn't about flim-flamming you to buy something one time you don't need. It's overpriced. It's not what the sales guy is telling you, and you get burned. This is a long con. They're looking to get money from you, possibly everything you've got. Your home, equity, your credit line, borrow from your family members. Okay, so they are looking to soak you completely if possible. And second thing is they want to dominate your time. They need free labor from you. So these are pretty big goals, dangerous goals. If you describe that in political terms, you would be talking about an authoritarian, dominating dictatorship, wanting to enslave people, have them work for nothing. They want all their whole lives, and they want everything. The people will give everything to the cause, and so on.
That's right.
Well, that's the level we're speaking about. That is the level we're speaking. We're talking about a totalistic system that is authoritarian in nature, whose goal is actually to take from you your capacity for critical thinking, and they want to take really all your time and all your labor. They want your soul. And if you've met people, and I have met many of them who have been taken body and soul by an MLM company, and they will literally commit financial suicide. They will mortgage their homes. They will quit their jobs. They will divorce their spouse. They will abandon family and friends, all in search because the leaders have told them this is the way. And this is what's going to get them ultimate happiness, freedom, and wealth, and respect, and so on. Part of it includes what you mentioned, the mystification. You can't do this with mundane, measurable things. You have to mystify the whole process. You have to claim you have esoteric knowledge. The guy on the stage, unlike some cults, I would say, I'll go out on to say that all cults, most cults, when we think of cults, one cult is different from the other cult and disconnected from the other cult. And each one has its guru, exalted supreme leader. But the two leaders have really nothing to do with each other. We can kind of see common characteristics, but they operate independently of one another. Multi-level marketing franchised the cult leader role. It's a scripted role so that there can be hundreds of these people on the stage, each one drawing in and using these techniques and tools of thought reform in which that person, male or female, is exalted, mystified as the keeper of great secret, of having special power that a mere human being like you don't have. And then has a plan for you to share in this greatness or this enlightenment, this beneficence that they are offering you, right? It's a scripted role. It's a scripted role in multi-level marketing. So rather than there being just, an L. Ron Hubbard who is seemingly presented as a kind of unique individual or a Jim Jones, recently there was a television series on a multi-level marketing scheme called Nexium, spelled N-X-I-V-M. So they used Roman numerals to, again, make it seem mystical. The guy that was running it has now been given a life sentence for sexual abuse. They called him engaging in sexual slavery and trafficking, sex trafficking. And he had taken on this role of God-like figure to this group. But it turns out that Keith Raniere was a veteran multi-level marketing schemer.
Right. That's
Where
right.
did he start? He started in Amway.
And he was so, I guess you could say, good or bad at it, that he got banned from ever doing it.
He created his own multi-level marketing scheme called Consumer Byline, B-U-Y. And it was kind of so-called group buying thing, but of course you're really just selling memberships into this club. I was prosecuted, was stopped, he was banned. But then he kind of, as often happens, the enforcement of this becomes forgotten, weakened, and he went and started a new MLM, which became known as Nexium. And its product was not discount buying membership. It was enlightenment itself. He sold plan for you to achieve, and know from your expertise in Scientology, this will sound very familiar, but he sold a multi-staged program of advancing yourself to a superhuman enlightenment stage of life.
That's right.
In which you could read people's minds, you could do all kinds of amazing things, achieve levels of fulfillment.
It was actually the closest thing I've ever seen to what Scientology would look like if you remove the religious component.
Right. Right. He sold it as MLM. Yeah. See, that's how close we're looking at here. He sold it as a business. It was a profit-making business. And that's how he defended himself. So when somebody complained and said, I think this is a fraud, I'm going to warn people about this. This is a recruitment scheme, and it's quite abusive, and it's not what they say. He immediately sued them for interfering with his contracts, with his business. He took on the posture, because that was the identity, as all multi-level marketing companies are, that he had a legitimate business. And these people were tortuously interfering with his business and harming his brand and so on. So yes, he did exactly the same thing. People didn't become heretics. They weren't shunned that way. They were considered as they became unfair competitors now, people who are trying to subvert and harm his company. And it was called a company.
Right.
So, but the point is, I think I'm trying to make here, his role while in that series that was on HBO, I believe, presented Keith Raniere, that's his name, who was the leader of this Nexium scheme, sex slave scheme as it's depicted. He is presented as somebody with seemingly unusual special powers over people. But actually, he was a stereotype. I've seen scores of guys like this. They are running a script. And this is the unique, and I think one of the more important elements of multilevel. If we conclude that a cult, and I think this is rather obvious to most people once they see it, a cult is a bad thing. It's a dangerous thing. Theoretically, there could be a good cult. But by definition, in a free society, people have many options. The idea of a cult is to shrink your options to where you have no options. You are enslaved, and you can't think your way out of it because they have enforced upon you a thought reform process that makes getting out or seeing an option or critically examining this impossible. Right. They've used special language on you. They've dominated your time. They've introduced special vocabulary, a kind of Orwellian vocabulary that kind of prevents you from thinking. They've mystified the whole thing into something. They've exalted this leader to where he is indomitable. You can't challenge him. He's above you.
That's right.
And so on. So
it's no longer a person, it's a symbol.
It's a symbol.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So if people understood, and many people do understand, that such an organization, a network, is not a good thing for an individual to get caught up in, then I think that if people could grasp the way that multi-level marketing is a cult, it would go a long way toward people being forewarned and forearmed and not fall into it, regardless of the business disguise, the utopian income promises, and all the other devices of trickery used to lure you in initially. But if you had heard or had read that this thing is a cult, at least possibly a cult, even if the question of it being a cult would occur to you, people would be far more diligent in the way they examined this thing. So exactly. I spent a lot of time in the book, and I also wanted to demystify a cult, because when people say it's a cult, well, they look at it and they say, it can't be a cult. They dress just like me, right?
That's right.
They're talking about business and profits and sales and products. They're talking about self-improvement, potential, human potential. And aren't those all good things? Don't we all believe in them? Entrepreneurship, who's against that, right? So it doesn't look like a cult. It's enormous too. Most cults, you assume, are kind of marginal, small operations. They're exotic, dress funny, talk funny, have some kind of weird, funny leader, maybe. So what multi-level marketing isn't fit any of that. And then finally, it's a business. So cult, business are mutually exclusive, and they really are. A business is by definition a measurable thing.
They can be. I will debate that a little bit because Enron, but in principle, you are not wrong.
Well, Enron you're speaking about.
Yeah,
the electric company?
Just how Enron was run. Yeah, it was very culty at the top.
Cultish inside it.
Yeah, very much so.
But yes, but it wasn't, as it turns out, it was cultish because it was presenting itself as the most innovative and genius company in the world. Yep. And it was being given these awards by Inc. magazine as most innovative. But it was all based on accounting fraud.
It was one of the most amazingly pulled off cons I have ever seen in the last 50 years.
but it was an accounting fraud, basically, that gave it this capacity, this seemingly supernatural financial power. It could expand, it could create capital and profit that nobody else seemed to be able to do. Well, it wasn't doing it. So when I say a business, I guess I should have said a real business.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to push back too hard on that. 'Cause
Yeah.
you're right. You're
Yeah.
not wrong at all. You're not wrong at all.
But by definition, a business is a measurable thing, and it is also a sector of life. You know, you have business, you have work, and then you get out at the end of the day, you go back home. I know businesses can intrude on that, but no business normally, no real business claims there's no dividing line at all, except multi-level marketing. They will tell
Well,
you.
yeah, let's talk about that for a second. There's actually two aspects of this I'd like to highlight. One, the one you just mentioned, and earlier, you mentioned a repeating pattern. You said something very important in this, and this is where we make the differentiation between a one-shot con job, you got taken to the cleaners because you got, a one-time deal that screwed you, right? But this is different because, as you mentioned, this is a long con. What we also refer to this as, in terms from a psychological perspective, is coercive control.
Coercive control, yeah.
And part of the definition of coercive control, and this is actually written into law in the UK, for example, in the UK Security Act, there is a provision about, and this is for domestic situations and honor-based violence, or intimate partner violence is where this is applied legally, but conceptually it applies to MLMs in the same way as it applies in domestic violence situations, and that is a repeating pattern over time of isolation, manipulation, and control. And those are your three basic elements of coercive control. So coercive control is mainly in the literature, it's mainly used to refer to domestic violence situations, but it actually applies across domains and very much applies to this MLM situation, right? So we can talk about coercive control and not be misusing the terminology when we talk about it in MLMs or Scientology or these long con type situations. And the interesting thing about this is the reason I'm talking about it or bringing it up and am encouraged about it is because the law is finally recognizing a repeating pattern is actually something where you can't prosecute an individual circumstance where a husband does something screwy to his wife or a wife does something really messed up to her husband, but it's just a one-off. But when you can show a repeating pattern, now you have intentional activity. Now it's not just an accident or a spontaneous mistake, because anybody can do that. Anybody in any domestic situation can screw up. But if you can show and document a continuing pattern of this, now it's a whole different game. And I believe, and I think this is an important aspect of this that I wanted to highlight. So I would like to get, what your input on that, because I think that's a key to this.
One of the very first books that was ever written about multi-level marketing, although it wasn't about the whole system, it was only about one company. It used this term that it's presented as the American dream, but it actually became a nightmare.
Yep.
And the nightmare, of course, isn't just that he lost money. That isn't really it at all. It's that he fell under this spell. He lost control of his life. He was dominated. He was deceived. And it changed basically his entire life. He lost track of family, friends. He abandoned the work that he had been doing, that he loved. And his values began to change. He became far more commercially oriented. The work intruded into every other area of his life. Eventually, it was 24/7. So he sort of lost interests or opportunity to explore other interests, including his own family, right? He was coercively controlled. That's the nightmare. The nightmare is that you've become enslaved. You've lost your freedom. And it was done without a gun. Nobody forced physically, and yet it did occur. And it wasn't just him, it was thousands of people. And this was done through the use, as all such schemes are, language, ritual, a specialized method of persuasion and time, repetition of things, isolation, getting you away from other people that might bring a different point of view to you, right. And then intruding intruding in an inappropriate way into affairs of your life that really have nothing to do, none of their business. And this is something that is one way this is done in multi-level marketing. When you come in, it's presented as sales, products, and so on. But when you get into it just a little bit, the first questions that will be presented, the first discussion, the first interaction between you and the company won't be, let us tell you how this business works, as you would in a normal company. Here's our product, here's our business model, here's what the job description we're talking to you about, here's our vision for the company, where we're going to be. No, they start asking you, what do you want out of life? What is your most treasured dreams? What are the dreams you've actually set aside? You've decided maybe you can never achieve them. What are those? The intimate dreams, the dreams that are really locked away in you, that your aspirations, your deepest aspirations. They try to pull this out of you, a kind of confession. When you confess that to them.
Bing, 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 bing. We're just lighting up the board on the Lifting 8 points here.
Yes. And that's one of the first interactions. And to some people, that's the one that turns them off. These are people that are kind of prepared and maybe not so vulnerable to this. They might say right away, well, that's not why I'm here, to divulge to you my deepest law. That's none of your business. I don't know why I'm out of here, right?
Yep.
But most people, they know, have kind of ventured into this out of a sense of longing. And so they know that already, that's sort of the filtration process, the initial scripted allurement or invitation, solicitation has that built into it. So they feel they can intrude this way and get you to engage, and many people will give it right up. Oh my God, yeah, I'm a mailman, but what I really wanted to be was a travel person, or I wanted to learn another language, or what I'd hoped to do was found a school or something. We all have aspirations. We may or may not realize them in our lives. They may come out in other ways, due to circumstances, but we all have them.
Well, that's for damn sure. And I couldn't help but just sit here thinking and laughing to myself, trying to imagine a job interview that would go that way, where you come in, present your CV or your resume, and you're all ready to, talk about your job performance and your past things and what you're prepared to do for this company, and asking questions. And instead, they start asking you about your personal hopes and dreams and aspirations, and how to, and whether you want to be connected more closely with your family and friends, and all. It would just be such a bizarre job interview,
right? In a normal job. But I will tell you the roots of this, Chris, and I said in the book there, and to myself, because this was my founding premise. Multi-level marketing is an American phenomenon created in America. It has exported, is now global, but it was invented here in a particular period of time, out from ordinary people. These were not strange people, really. The three characters that kind of interacted with each other to create this thing. a guy with a little tiny failing vitamin company in Southern California, and then two other middle-aged men, one a pop psychologist who was not doing well, and the other a seasoned door-to-door sales manager selling cemetery plots. These were the characters. So out of their life experience and their worldview was invented this thing called multi-level marketing. And the one dominant character in there was the sales guy. And this is a sales guy who had been a salesman in the 30s or even earlier. And he had been subjected to the psychology of selling. Back when selling was a more specialized and marginal field of work, very few people were actually in sales. Sales exploded after the war in marketing, PR, advertising. Prior to that, being a salesman was a kind of odd thing to do and never a respectable thing to do in particular. Yep. The sales guy was presented as a kind of slippery or tragic figure. And it has never been depicted very positively, even in literature. I mean, our earliest is a story of selling is probably The Death of a Salesman, Henry Miller's The Death of a Salesman.
That's right.
And that's certainly not a sympathetic character, Willy Loman. The other one is
I found your breakdown of this in your book to be absolutely fascinating. It really did give some historical perspective to me that changed my entire view of how I look at that as an industry or an occupation. And society. It was actually you wrote quite well about that whole history. It was really quite good.
Yeah. In that world, especially back when selling was a small, disciplined, marginal area of work, a kind of on the edge of respectability. To call somebody looks like a salesman, not a good thing to say. Talks like a salesman, not a good thing to say. So has a sales personality, that used to be not a good thing. That meant he's a manipulator, insincere, and so on. But in that world, there was this psychology that was taught to the prospects that was totalistic. They didn't just teach you how to sell. They taught you that selling is the ultimate and most basic element of human interaction. And that being a salesman is a kind of missionary task. And that it unlocks that in sales, you understand human nature more than anybody else. Everybody else is a kind of a mark. You have superior knowledge and we're going to teach it to you. You can get people to do things for you. You can get them to buy things. You can get them to sell things for you. We're going to teach you the powers of persuasion, domination, control. It's all legal. And why would I want to know that? Because it's a kind of higher status. So this idea of a totalistic, business-oriented psychology did exist. It doesn't exist in jobs, but it did exist, particularly back when selling was this sort of marginal. These were the foot soldiers of capitalism. They had to be indoctrinated with this belief that selling was a good thing, a natural thing, and that people who did it were the smart guys, even though the world kept calling you kind of, you know, the jerks of the world. You know, they didn't like you. They didn't respect you. But that's their problem.
It was its own little in-group, you know.
It was its own little in-group. And in that group, there were books, and I have them, and I've read them, and they look like religious texts almost. They are homilies. They are taught, they are presented with moral authority about the goodness of selling, the necessity, that it's the important, it's the bedrock of our free economy, and so on. And you're the soldier in this, you're the Marine, and so on. So multi-level marketing drew on this and was able to take that kind of intrusive, totalistic way of thinking and then present it as a way of life for everybody. And I also mentioned that they weren't the vanguard of that. The vanguard of that was really Dale Carnegie. the Dale
I
Carnegie
was hoping
course.
you'd go there. Yeah, I was going to ask
Yeah.
about this.
And that's where these guys met. This is where multi-level marketing, the originators of it, met in a Dale Carnegie course. That's very meaningful because he was the person that was saying, you know how the salespeople work? Well, that's how you're going to survive in the modern economy. And of course, this was written in the middle of the Depression, and people were out of work, hungry, and searching. And he's saying that the answer is by becoming a kind of entrepreneur, a salesperson, to get other people to do what you want. That's how you're going to survive. How do you do that? You have to be positive. You can't walk around with a scowl. You smile. What do you smile about? Think of something to smile about. Laugh to yourself, and so on. He instructs them, and then tries to tell them that this is actually quite normal and natural to affect emotions, to manipulate people, and so on.
Sort of the
Well,
original idea of fake it till you make it.
the original idea of fake it till you make it was a real thing. It came out of the sales world. And yes, that's exactly right. That was, we talk about it now as a kind of almost pathetic way of living, you know, that you're always kind of on the make and waiting for it to produce the results that you are told that acting this way will eventually bring good things back to you.
Yep.
But that is exactly what the salesperson was trained to do, you know, to think positively, present to the world a positive, happy face, even though they're broke and they've had 10 rejections. The 11th person they call on, they're glad handing, they're smiling. And so you had to train yourself to do this, right? And the only way the companies could train you was to teach it to you as a form of psychology, as a way of life. You couldn't just teach it as like you would a carpenter, you know, with the tools of the trade that you can put down and walk back and live your life any way you want. That's right. Sales training carried over into the rest of your life. It was the one thing, the one trade you couldn't put aside.
Well, you know, that's actually all the way forward to Glengarry Glen Ross, where we see Alec Baldwin, you know, always be selling, right? Always. You are always on the job. I mean, this is not history we're talking about, the old ideas that nobody thinks about anymore. This is all the way up to now. And
yes.
and the real harm that Dale Carnegie caused was to write a popular book about this, where he
yes.
took this and he disseminated it and told everybody.
Popular. Yes.
This is
millions of people.
Yeah.
How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yep.
Was the book, which then became a course. And the course and also often involved public speaking and so on. But it was mainly an indoctrination program to take ordinary people, introverted people, people of every stripe, and frame them into becoming sales type of person.
That's right.
And therefore, if you weren't like that, you became, you know, a discarded person. You weren't willing to be successful. So, and also your success depended on a personality type, on a personal presentation rather than on character. And
exactly.
that's why, that's why the historian that I referred to said this was the era when we moved from character to personality.
Yes. And this is, and I think that this has a lot of relevance across many domains all the way to now. This is, again, this is not ancient history. This is 100 years ago that all of this is starting, we're talking about. But these are the kind of events, and these are the people who shaped so much of the current attitudes of Americans in ways that most Americans aren't even aware. And I find this endlessly fascinating to trace the genus of these things and figure out where they came from. And Carnegie was absolutely front and center on this. And
that's also why when you enter into a multi-level marketing event, it all seems so familiar in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing's alien. They're not talking about flying saucers. They're not talking about what's that term? Engrams.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
there's nothing really that you haven't heard your whole life.
Exactly.
Entrepreneurship.
Which is one of the reasons, by the way, just to bring this back to Lifton's points, why their loaded language can be so manipulative is because they are taking words you think you already know. These aren't new words. This isn't an Ingram or a Hubbard Xenu thing. This is this is sales. This is marketing. This is, multi-level marketing. If you try to break down what the hell does that even mean,
Right.
it doesn't really make any sense as a term,
No.
which I myself had never even thought of until you pointed it out. And I went, oh my God, you're right. That term doesn't even mean anything.
Yeah.
So it's quite insidious how this works because it is so closely aligned with concepts and words and ideas that we think we already understand.
It's homegrown.
Yeah.
It's so homegrown. And so it seems so familiar, and that's what that is. And I think that is the word of insidious. It insinuates into your life,
Yeah.
It permeates and it can draw you in, and it feels like, well, I can't really nail down what's wrong with this, because everything's positive and it's presented as legal. It's a business income. I'm not doing so great right now anyway. Maybe this is the thing. And it also fits into this whole American dream concept too. The American dream is not a collective dream. It's not a dream that we as a people will move forward. It's that I will have a breakthrough and I will succeed. It's always an individualistic thing. So when the scheme comes along, you start thinking, maybe this is my chance. The American dream says there is a chance, it's out there, that nobody will be left behind. The opportunity is always there. But well, you haven't found it yet. But now along comes multi-level and you think, well, maybe this is it. And so that's all familiar. And as I say, it's all familiar until the business proposition is actually presented, which comes very quickly. The business proposition is sold without scrutiny, without even knowledge of how it actually works. The endless chain part of it has been diverted. You don't see the fatal flaw in that. The concept of being a salesperson when they are replicating your sales job by the thousands in your area, making it impossible for you to sell because the market will be saturated with salespeople. That too is put off aside to you. So you've bought into something that is presented in fantasy visionary terms, but the specifics have sort of been obscured to you. But once the specifics are revealed, the whole thing collapses. It makes no sense at all.
Exactly.
But that's the whole idea, is to prevent that from happening for as long as possible.
Well, exactly. That's the retention angle. And I want to talk about some of those techniques that they're using for that. But first, I'd like to go to the beginning where people, who is it? What is the demographic? What is the group of people who are going to fall for this, who are going to be susceptible to this kind of manipulation? Is it stupid people? Is it desperate people? Like, what category of people, how do we describe them?
Yeah, this is a question I'm asked all the time. What's the typical MLM victim or adherent? So I've been looking at this for a long, long time now, quite a few years. And I concluded quite a long time ago, there is no such thing.
There you go. Same with me and cults. Go ahead, please explain.
Cults, yeah, exactly the same.
Right.
It's very same. Of course, the cult is always presented as something that only a certain kind of person would fall for. And even the person in the cult would say, I would never join a cult.
Right.
You must be talking about somebody else. Wouldn't be about me.
That's right.
So, yeah. So, but multi-level marketing, in particular, I think people do, can't see this, and they just it is a blind spot, and so that is part of the mind control that has gone on to subvert you from looking at it critically. But once you do, then the thing does begin to fall apart. But actually, I lost the thread of what your point was.
Oh no, we were going into the what my next question, of course, is going to be, because there isn't a personality type.
Yes. So who is the stereotype, or who's the
MLM type,
classic?
yeah.
Yeah, there isn't one. It's anybody.
But
there is some history to this. I mean, but it in the end, what you see is that the message, more and more people. It is offering a kind of course, it's offering an income proposition. So, if you're 10 years old, then, well, it won't be aimed at children. There are products and schemes aimed at children. This isn't one of them, gaming and something. No, this is an adult thing, for sure. It originally was kind of aimed at small town people, rural areas. That was kind of the mainstay. Multi-level marketing started, the two guys that really exploded it in Amway were from Michigan. It was a kind of a white person's thing originally. In fact, I had somebody tell me recently they thought multi-level marketing was a white person's thing. But of course, in the whole world, the vast majority of people in multi-level marketing are not white.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It would be every other color except white. There are plenty of white people in it, but there's no ethnic orientation to this whatsoever.
Correct.
And but there is kind of a pattern. It did kind of start with mostly men. It did kind of start with smaller town, rural. You could lay over some sociological and economic factors, downsizing and the evisceration of small towns. Factories went away. The blue collar people were the first ones to really get hit by our modern economy and sort of began to be left behind. So the appeal of this sales scheme would have been particular for them. But very quickly, by the 80s, it was already, and even in the 70s, moving up the scale to the white collar, as flattening of management and offshoring and things like. They started feeling the insecurity and seeing it. I've seen it with financial planners, lawyers, medical doctors. It exported itself. We think of it as kind of built on the American dream and the American narrative. It went straight into Canada, Australia, and the UK, and then Europe. And the big prize was China. Got into China by the late 90s. It's at least a third of
which is amazing, because that really is the holy grail of cons, because Scientology has never succeeded at getting into China, and they have tried.
Well, Scientology probably, this is maybe a little bit of an aside, but multi-level marketing was stopped dead in its tracks in 1998 in China. They outlawed it, banned it, stopped all direct selling. And there were riots and there was a tremendous turmoil over this. But the government saw it as a superstition, a sect, a cult. And it wasn't the side of the Chinese government that was enforcing laws against fraud or consumer loss. It wasn't an economic concern at all. It was from the security services. They saw it as a threat to the narrative of Chinese communism. So they saw it as a superstitious sect, a dangerous sect, a cult movement. And that's probably why they never let Scientology get a foothold, because it was, in their view, clearly a sect or a cult movement, a belief system, and so on. Multi-level marketing began in the United States. Its disguise was business. But from the prism of looking at it when it entered China, they looked at and saw these huge gatherings, the ecstatic cheering, the guru leader up on the stage. And they said, that's not business. Business is factories, making, plastic things and electronic, that's business. What in the heck is this? It looked to them as it really is.
Right.
They saw it. They saw it straight away.
It's amazing to me and kind of sad. In a way, I understand the human nature aspect of this and the conflicting views about it, but I have to comment on the fact that it is weird that it's the authoritarian governments almost uniformly that will just kick cults right out of their countries right away. Russia, China, of course, are the two biggest examples of this. They hate Scientology. They hate Jehovah's Witnesses. They've thrown them in prison in Russia. They have banned the practices, and the reason for it is at a fundamental level, I believe the basic reason is because it's a threat to the centralized power of the
competition.
It's competition, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And
I think that's what
in the party making citizens this happy.
That's right. That's right. And I think what happened in China, I had some contact with Chinese government through some third-party consulting companies, which I have since learned were actually part of the government, but it's always hard to know in China. But I did have some direct work with them. I also had some contact with a university in China about my book. But I think what occurred there was that Amway and the multi-level marketing people convinced the government that this will not be a threat to your rule. In fact, we will never challenge your rule. And we can help you because it keeps hope alive. That's really what it does in the US too. And I think that's why it was embraced by the government here, is that even as the middle class began its descent in the early 70s, income stagnated, home ownership became either declining overall, or the amount of equity you had in a home got smaller and smaller. Higher education became out of reach. Healthcare suddenly became unaffordable. All of these things began to happen starting in the 70s. So as many other people have said, the American dream appears to be tarnished or dying. Now, that would normally create an opposition force among the public. But what if among the public who are losing in the larger economic story and picture, we're being told, no, 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 opportunity is alive and well. It all works. You don't have to join a union. You don't have to join a political party. Don't get into it. It's called multi-level marketing. The American dream, it's the last best hope for the American dream. And it's the one place that you can go where you see people screaming about how great the American dream is. Everywhere else, people are a little wary of it these days because out of their life experience.
That's right. That's right. I've certainly had that experience. Do you think it's purposeful on the part of the government officials? Do you think they see it that clearly?
Yes, I do. Instinctively, they do. I don't think it required a lot of calculation. This happened, as I chronicle in the book, with the Amway Corporation, which again, the government had just shut down Amway's two big competitors and left Amway predominant in this new field and gave it legality.
This was 1979? 79, yeah. And this is Federal Trade Commission.
Federal Trade Commission.
Okay, and what is, and let's actually clarify this for people, because I think most people out there, I sure as hell didn't, really understand what the Federal Trade Commission is and what it does. How do they enforce law, and how did it happen that Amway got the golden blessing from the FTC and has been hands off ever since?
Yeah, so it's straight out politics. So let's just start with that. I mean, so
Okay.
I don't have to, that it's traditional corrupt politics, the way politics kind of work
Okay.
everywhere, I guess, but especially here. We have to remember up till 79, the federal government, in the guise of the Federal Trade Commission, in the office of the Federal Trade Commission, whose job was to enforce competition, to prevent monopolies. That was Federal Trade Commission. And also to oversee elements of deception and unfairness and harm, fraud, in other words, but fraud in the guise of business, or in the face of business. Federal Trade Commission cannot put anybody in jail. Every case is a civil matter. It is an office of the executive branch. It is not part of the judicial branch. They are not judges. And so it's a political office, and it's a relatively small office too. That office determined that the business model of multi-level marketing, the endless chain, was inherently deceptive and harmful. And they prosecuted the three biggest ones in existence at the time, in the 70s, early 70s: Holiday Magic, Costco, and Amway. The two, Costco and Holiday Magic, were closed down. The third case against Amway was an identical case: endless chain, unsustainable, inherently unfair, inherently deceptive, saturation must follow, people will lose, not really direct selling, and so on. Recruitment, pyramid recruitment. And that case went on for several years, but in the end, the Federal Trade Commission accepted a ruling by one judge who was not even an administrative law judge. They did not have to accept this person's ruling, and the ruling did not have to apply to any other company. But it somehow became presented as almost scripture. It was the final word. Why? I argue in the book with straight up politics. Amway was deeply embedded in the National Republican Party. The two founders, one was the finance chairman of the Republican Party, who also became the chief fundraiser for the Ronald Reagan campaign. And the other one was the chairman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
And
So
what are their names?
Jay Van Andel, and Richard DeVos.
Right. And if any of you are wondering if that is in some way, if Richard's in some way related to Betsy.
Betsy is his daughter-in-law.
Correct.
Right? So his son, often called Dick DeVos, is the husband of Betsy DeVos.
And so I just wanted to make that direct comparison there, because if, in case anybody's wondering, oh, that was back in 79, that was a long time ago. Things have changed since then.
Not at all. No, they were deeply involved in funding the campaign of political candidates: Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, who turned out to be very fortuitous for them, because Gerald Ford became the president when Richard Nixon resigned, and Gerald Ford's district was where Amway was located. And they had been pouring money into his campaign. They funded his library after his presidential period there. And then so they had a tremendous impact. They were also at the Chamber of Commerce and presenting this as American capitalism. So I would say that, yes, it was a rather deliberate embrace, that this thing is again reaching out. The little people, the ordinary people, are going to be taught these fundamental premises of a corporation, of business, of principles of business. They're going to be taught that the success path is an individual path, not a collective path with a union or social movement. It's an individual entrepreneurship. And they saw that as so powerfully delivered because they'd seen the rallies and they saw how people accepted this, that the reality of it, the losses, the loss rate, the impossibility of the actual business was simply disregarded. Remember, there is a premise, there is a tenet of advertising. If it sells, it's true.
Right? There you go. Because because I want to comment on the fact that, you know, it bears being said out loud that when you build a cult and a cult following and a cult belief system or dogma around a principle that every single American was raised to believe is true, your work is 3/4 of the way done already through the childhood indoctrination that all of your target public have experienced. And that indoctrination, of course, is the American dream, as we've been harping on here. It bears repeating. This is not a small thing. The American dream has lived large. It was something I was taught in high school as formally. We examined it for an entire semester. I mean, this is not something that just gets some lip service every now and again. Maybe with current generations, I don't know how people are taught now, but I know when I came up in the 80s, it was still very much alive, still very much being talked about as a cultural thing. It's a touchstone for us, and it's a deeply held belief of the American psyche that anybody can potentially make it given the right, you know, mix of things, and especially given hard work on your part. It's all about your industriousness. And there's a certain degree of truth in that you will not succeed really, really greatly if you do not work your ass off. That is absolutely true, but it's no guarantee. You know, and as I mentioned in earlier episodes, earlier podcasts, Star Trek has proven to us, if nowhere else, again, saying out loud, you can do everything right and still fail. And it's not your fault.
Right. But the American dream mythology does not add all that into it. You know, it really is presented as it's up to you. And if you don't succeed, well, it's not because of the American dream. It's you. It has to be you.
That's right.
And so, you know, the loser status is built into this. And also, as you know, as you say, in a theoretical general way, it's kind of true that there's an opportunity for everybody. In real life, it doesn't take into consideration abusive families, discrimination, the stigma of poverty, disease, all kinds of, you know, sickness, all kinds of unfortunate things that people that create a grossly unlevel field. The guy that grows up with a wealthy family and goes to Harvard is not competing on a level field with the kid that grows up in a small town and so on. Anyway, so the question you raised is, to what degree is the myth, the lie, the big lie of multi-level marketing, you know, adopted by the government for its own purposes? Mm-hmm. And I show the pattern of payoffs. You know, there is payoffs going on, undoubtedly. I mean, I have the numbers in there of how much the DeVos family has contributed, $200 million to finance for political candidate, but also they have raised money through the Republican Party and through the Chamber of Commerce, where they have played such an important role. They also played an important role in the Chamber of Commerce in getting China into the World Trade Organization, which helped them in China for being allowed to operate over there. Right. This is all political manipulations. And I do think that that accounts for a lot of it. Remember, it really took off in the early years of the Reagan administration. And the Reagan administration was known for hating the government, telling you that the market will provide. Anybody who turns to the government, that's a false approach, that business is the way. And he cut out a lot of the safety net, the programs that were designed to help people with subsidies or whatever, food stamps, and he reduced a lot of those things. And he kept promoting this idea of individual responsibility, that it's up to you, it's up to you. And that message was reinforced.
Yeah,
in multi-level marketing.
And that's how we get these social reinforcements, cultural reinforcements of MLM, so that it's become this almost embedded into our culture now. And we're fighting You know, you and I are really just a few of the very small number of voices who are saying, "Hey,
It's
guys, this
growing. The voice is getting louder, and
yeah,
I think the political cover for this will begin to break down as a result of that. But I want to add in to my definition of Ponzinomics, Chris, because I talked about the delusion, the belief system built on the delusion of a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi as viable.
yeah,
But there's a last sentence in my definition, which is in the very first part of the book, that a belief system, a delusional belief system like this, can only, wherever it operates, it necessarily involves the collusion of government. And that's because without it, the inherent flaw in it would become more apparent. People would realize it. The voices of the critical voices would get a greater listenership. You know, people would pay more attention. The facts would reveal it. But if it has the authority of government behind it, as you pointed out, it does. The Federal Trade Commission confirms that it affirms it's legitimate. The political parties, by their affiliation, they have a 40-member caucus in Congress. But it all happened in 1982, I think. 79, Amway escapes a prosecution for being a pyramid fraud that if it would have been shut it down. 81, they escaped jail time. They were being arrest warrants for the two founders of Amway for tax evasion on taking product across the border into Canada. So Canada, and this was all documented in the press. Ronald Reagan is elected, and then they concoct this idea of Reagan coming and speaking at an Amway meeting, and Amway sort of saying, yes, this is the way. Reaganomics and Amway are one and the same. They would mutually exalt each other. But some of the Reagan people were saying, you know, this, I'm not so sure about this. You just were prosecuted for fraud by the Federal Trade Commission. You just were prosecuted for tax evasion in Canada. So do we really want Ronald Reagan speaking at a conference, a big meeting like this? So what they did is they rebranded a giant Amway rally in Atlanta as a it was going to be a rally for the spirit of capitalism, the spirit of entrepreneurship, free enterprise, a free enterprise spectacle. And it would be sponsored not by Amway, but by the Chamber of Commerce. And Ronald Reagan will come and speak, which he did. Of course, who paid the bill for the whole thing? Amway. And who was in the audience? Amway. And Ronald Reagan is on the stage. Who filmed it and then sold the video to its members for $50, I think? Amway. So they were given the production rights. They had the members. So it was fused. The Reaganomics, the trickle down, right, was fused with the multi-level marketing model. And so I do think it was a rather calculated mutual arrangement, a partnership that developed. I will add one other factor though, too. If you're in the government and something like this comes along that is promising to enrich you, give you campaign funds, promote you to a vast audience with their phone system and their later emails, as they did do for Reagan and Bush too, Amway and other MLMs too. So you get a lot of money and you get support. And what's the downside? The downside is if you criticize it, they take that away from you. But if you just turn your head and look the other way and let them go on and don't get involved in these questions of unfairness, harm, pyramid scheme, loss, deception, just look the other way. What happens to you? Well, not much. Really nothing, because the voices of those victims is silent. they have been convinced it's all their fault. They're shamed into silence. They don't think to en masse besiege the Federal Trade Commission or the Department of Justice that this is a gigantic fraud, I've been cheated, and you need to know, and you need to do something on behalf of the public. No, it doesn't happen. So if you're a regulator, there's really not much upside to enforcing the law here.
Right, because you're just going to get socially and professionally ostracized in your world as a government official, because these guys wield real power, because they have real money. I mean, when you're talking about campaign contributions of $200 million, that's what's reported. That's what they're willing to be transparent about.
That's right. The influence is larger than that.
You got to think with the bigger picture, and that's just in the United States. Let's not talk about how they've contributed to campaign contributions, politicians, etc., regulators in other countries all over the world. I mean, Thailand, isn't this blowing up in Thailand?
Thailand, but there've been prosecutions for bribery. Herbalife just paid a huge fine for bribery, and it was a whole bribery ring in China.
What?
It's all been in the public. Well, they call it bribery over there, and here we call it campaign contributions.
Bingo. And I don't want, I love my government. I don't want to be cynical about my country, but I got to be factual. And the fact of the matter is that people are corrupt, and they're going to do corrupt stuff. And then that happens here, and it happens all the time. And it is to all of our mutual detriment that we let this go on and don't.
When in the book, I think we've become so inured to it. It's so pervasive, and the language has all changed. We call it soft money, right? Or we call it, influencing and lobbying and having, pressure. Even that is considered, and everybody's just an interest group. So, if the corporations are there promoting their interests, well, what's wrong with that? Don't the retired people, don't the school teachers do that? Don't the nursing homes? Everybody's just an interest group. So we have actually lost, I think, the capacity, many of us, for even recognizing what is corruption anymore. Yeah. So in the book, I went back and tried to use the language and the worldview of people in the beginning of the 1900s, the period of good government, reform government, muckraking journalism, and they used real terms. They called it bribery, boodling, graft, right? Yep. They called it treason. They called it treason. The Treason of the Senate was one of the most famous books. In fact, it was that book that caused Theodore Roosevelt to attack them as muckrakers. That's where the term came from, and it was directed at that man who wrote that book. So I used that. I said, we got to go back to see how this actually works, to understand it, because like you said, we love our government. We don't want to think of the government as inherently corrupt. But if we're not willing to see how the money can be used to buy protection for some really destructive things to go on in the name of business and be presented as legitimate and good and so on, then we can't grasp really even for ourselves what's happening here. So I felt, and the feedback I've gotten from people about the book, one of the things I have heard more consistently is this was kind of the disillusioning part of the book. They had the hardest time. Yep. They didn't reject it. They got it because the facts are all there, and it's no hyperbole involved here. It's just laying them out. But when you see the picture, it is disillusioning to see how influence can be purchased and law enforcement can be thwarted with just money and propaganda.
That's right. But and powerful money, lots of money, and powerful propaganda. Let's be clear.
That's right. Sophisticated. That's right.
Some out of the garage operation going on.
That's right.
This is as pro as it can get.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
the
yeah.
office on K Street for the DSA, the PR departments, the law firms that these companies employ, biggest and most powerful law firms, the amount of money they will put into legal defenses, into promotions, studies, all kinds of things that they do to protect themselves or promote themselves is formidable.
Yeah. Good
And
word
it's
for
right
it.
up there. And as I said, everybody knows about big pharma. They know about the arms industry, their lobby. They know about the banks. You know, we know about these various lobbies, but most people don't know there's a pyramid lobby.
Exactly. And when you talk about a 40-person caucus at the congressional level, that's the kind of thing that really sets my hackles off, because and all of the above. I mean, it's just it is so embedded now. So now that we've kind of painted this really dark picture, and you're not wrong, reading that part of the book, I had the exact same phenomenon. It was very disillusioning. But you know, ice water dips don't have to be bad things. I mean, reality and truth are valuable. It is important for us to grasp
Yes, I
this
hope
stuff.
so.
I'm not, you know, it's like, yeah, you have this emotional impact, but so what? The truth is the truth. Let's embrace it. Let's do something with it. I don't
Yes.
want to run away from the truth, and I would rather live with an uncomfortable truth than a pleasing lie. So, I mean, that's at the top of my Facebook page, so it must be true. So,
Well, that's
so
yes, that's a way of looking at the world, a way of living. And I certainly, this book comes out of that same point of view,
yeah,
that the truth will make you free, and a lie can please you, and maybe for a little while. I think this explosion we just had in Washington on January 6th, thousands of people invading the Capitol building, destroying property, and talking about and actually killing a policeman and so on, based on a lie.
that's right.
It was based on a lie. The demonstrably untrue statement that the election was massively fraudulent, fixed, and so on. That an election a voting machine company was involved, and then there was a conspiracy in these particular states. Court after court, investigation after show, didn't happen. Wasn't there? Not even nothing like it was like that. Yet that lie took on a life of its own. And if it were true, you can certainly understand the rage it would excite.
Yes.
Imagine if we had an election and the duly elected person who claims to have won by a landslide suddenly shows up as having lost, and it was all done by subterfuge, fixed voting machine company, and evil characters inside the government. Well, yeah, you can see why people would feel I got to do something,
That's
but
right.
it was a lie. So a lie, a big lie, and that was a big lie.
Yeah.
That kind of lie is what we're talking about here with multi-level marketing. A big lie that we have this livelihood opportunity for millions of people, and that you just have to join these companies and get out there and recruit and pay and recruit your friends, that this could be the answer to your livelihood, to your life's hopes. This is the fulfillment of the American dream. That is a serious lie. And to think that that lie, the reality is 99% of the people every year are losing money, quitting, losing, being replaced, lost time, ruined families, and so on. And then money from that is poured back into the government to protect it from law enforcement. Yeah, that's not good. This is bad for the public exposed to it, bad for the government that is corrupted. And the truth is the only antidote that I can see for these things. And the truth is a very uncomfortable truth. To get to the truth, you've got to accept the facts and set aside the false hope of the American dream story that multi-level marketing is the answer to the American dream. Not get rid of the American dream, but get rid of this as a pathway to it. Demonstrably false. It's an entrapping, dead end, harmful path to take. It's not a path. It's not business. It's not direct selling. And you have to give that up. And then you have to go over and account for, and there has to be a reckoning for, well, how has it gone on all these years and nothing done about it. That has to be factored in too.
Right.
And then the truth just has to be told. And the truth will have its own power. It doesn't require millions of dollars. And it is gaining strength.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because we see exposés even up to the level of John Oliver. You know, a couple of years ago, does a whole MLM breakdown and shows graphically and beautifully. It was a wonderful episode where he broke it all down and showed it was all bullshit. What do you see more of that happening? Do you think that that is helping to educate the public?
Unquestionably. I mean, I'll use a little barometer, don't have a study to point to, don't have data. I think I have a pretty reliable barometer because I'm called by journalists. I just spent time with BBC this week. I've talked with journalists a couple weeks back in the Virgin Islands. I've talked to journalists in Germany. So, I mean, I think the calls from journalists, the attitude of the journalists, the information that journalists bring to me, and their point of view when they begin the interview or talk to me, the questions, how they frame the questions, good barometer of public current, where the level of thinking and understanding is. And I have seen a tremendous change over the last, I would say, as recent as 5-6 years, let's say, maybe going back to around 2012, let's put it at 8 years. But it has greatly intensified in the last 5 years. Right. Now, the word cult routinely is brought up. Before it was like, whoa, we're not going there. We're not talking about cult. And loss rates, I was always having to argue this and go through these elaborate explanations of how it is the model produces these loss rates. But they came to the interview with the view, well, it just can't be true. Can't be. Millions of people wouldn't keep joining something that would produce losses like that. That's just not. Now, the concept of propaganda, brainwashing, government protection, fear of regulators, of the political consequences, routinely as accepted by them. The loss rates, I don't have to argue it. They start from that premise. They know it now.
Good.
So I think it's, you mentioned the John Oliver show, and we have other things like the series that was on Showtime with Kirsten Dunst on Becoming a God in Central Florida was a series on Showtime. The series on Nexium, The Vow, that's on HBO. And it's starting to fit into more comedy shows and discussions, and it's gradually being accepted as a reality, a phenomenon that is a folly, that is a delusion, that is rampant right now, but nobody is pretending that it is real anymore. It's being presented as a kind of a virus that has entered the economy.
Well, I think that is, and I'll say from my own Scientology experience with this too, because in 1980, Scientology was unassailable. That's 1990, right. It was unassailable. In 2000, it was less so. And by 2010, people really got that it was a dangerous cult. It wasn't just some screwy little operation that Tom Cruise kind of was involved in, and it was basically the same as Kabbalah or something. It definitely changed, but it took hundreds, thousands of articles, hundreds of thousands of people becoming aware of it, talking about it, and for me, the we made it point was when it got into comedy.
Yeah.
Was when it became the punchline. When people are that familiar with it that they can laugh at a punchline to a generalized audience of people randomly selected at a comedy club or something, now you know, okay, this is in the population now. This is a cultural thing. We've now passed that. I don't think we're there with MLMs yet, but I think we're getting there. I think that we are moving in that direction. And so your book, your efforts for years now have clearly had positive effects on this. You've been talking to media for years about this, and I think exactly what you just said is probably about the best metric we're going to have for
About the best metric, yeah.
yeah,
And it may eventually show up in recruitment declines. There's some hints that that's happening, but I don't quite see that yet.
yeah,
And
yeah.
but I do see it in the tenor of conversation and the questioning, and as you said, in comedy and skits and in sitcoms, or even in things that are not really funny, but it's accepted now. It's begun to get it that this thing is a scam, it's a folly, it's an absurdity, and yet those who fall for it just haven't figured this out yet, you know, and the information, and that's how it's gotten. There is some rancor, you know, you see on chat rooms where the people who have seen it are sort of attacking the people that are still in it. It's sort of a reverse of the throwing out the loser and vilifying the loser.
Yeah,
Now the losers are out there vilifying the people that are still in it. Like,
right.
what are you doing? You know, can't you see the light? I mean, wake up, you know. And
Exactly.
so the same kind of derision is now, you know, flowing the other direction. But I guess that's part of it too, you know.
Right. No, that's the thing, because you're also, because a lot of what you see, you know, this is one of the reasons why cult is becoming a more known thing now, is because the internet has enabled people, has empowered people like me to speak up, to speak out, to give us, it's given us a platform we never would have had otherwise, unless we could somehow convince a reporter to listen to us.
Yeah.
And now with YouTube and with blogs and with podcasts, we have the ability to broadcast it ourselves. And there's catharsis in that for victims, for trauma survivors and former members of these groups, especially MLMs, and because they live so much on social media now. And there is the exposure of the abuses and stuff it's a ground level sort of thing that over time matters and has an effect on the culture itself if enough people step up.
So, you know, beyond Scientology and beyond multi-level marketing is sort of where you're going with your studies,
Yeah.
Which is the generic phenomenon of coercive,
Control.
what's the term used?
Coercive control. Yeah.
Coercive control.
Yeah.
And that is maybe the frontier, I think, is a bit of the frontier.
Yep.
And we're seeing it now on such a scale where you have millions of people deluded into violent behavior, nihilism, hatred, and you go, what is going on here? What are they so upset that they would be willing to carry guns, threaten people, and take on this violent a mode of being? You know, what is going on? Well, it's what we don't see is what they've been subjected to.
Right.
Right. But at least the phenomenon is in people's faces now, you know.
Right.
And I think that is the next frontier. We've all seen it also in small cults. We've seen it also in family situations, as you mentioned, you know,
Yep.
where spousal abuse, child abuse, and so on, which is a kind of, you know, distilled down to this little household, these same patterns and
Exactly.
same methods of coercive control, sometimes involving physical abuse, but not always.
Nope.
It's not
Right.
absolutely necessary that you physically restrain somebody or harm them or even threaten them physically. So that is kind of the next frontier. And that's where I felt that, you know, for people to understand multi-level marketing, ultimately, you can't just see it as kind of a bad business or a business or something that crosses some legal line or a cult-like thing. You really have to see it as the belief system it is, understand that how sophisticated this is, the propaganda machine, the political influence buying, the tools of persuasion that are used, and the history behind this. And that's really what the book is all about. And that's what I hope brings for people that want to, students, researchers, and others that want to understand what is this thing going on here. This provides the broadest and best documented, because it's very thoroughly documented too.
I was very impressed. I was very impressed with all the citations and references and footnotes and things that you had in there. It was a real education to read your book. It distilled so much information down into one easy to consume and an easy to understand source. And I really, really appreciated you putting all the effort into it that you did.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my goal.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I guess we'll move toward wrapping up by telling people, where do they find this amazing book of yours?
Amazon.com. That's where it is. And paperback and ebook for Kindle. An audiobook is in the works. That's coming.
Good.
Yes, for immediately right now, it's Kindle or paperback. Paperback's about 350 pages, I think, or 380, something like that, all together.
Cool. And it goes fast, by the way, guys. It's not dense academic prose.
No, it's not. It's definitely not academic prose. And but as I said, it is quite well documented. It's a kind of a journalistic treatment of this, and the subject matter is multi-level marketing. It's not a story of some poor family that got caught up in it or anything. It's the story is, what is this thing, multi-level marketing, this phenomenon? Where did it come from? How did it get invented? What were the stuff of our culture and our beliefs that came into its, made it up, the threads that were woven together to make this thing up? And then how did it germinate? And then how did it survive legally? How did it spread? And how does it persuade and control and dominate after inflicting losses on this, which brings you into the whole realm of understanding cults. So yeah, it takes you through several domains of life: ordinary life, day-to-day work life, selling life, marketing life, political life, and belief, the world of beliefs, and what constitutes belief. So I'm hopeful that it will help people and become a source for students and for schools and journalists, and of course ordinary people that are affected by this, solicited, or some member of their family or friends are.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, folks. Well, you owe it to yourself. Check it out, pick it up, get it, read it. And yeah, get that audiobook out, because I can tell you from my own experience in self-publishing that that'll definitely get you a lot more audience. It is a big deal. I did not realize as when I was my first time author work how big of a deal it was to get that audiobook out.
Okay, well, I'm happy to hear that, because this is an area I'm just exploring. I've found a company to help me do it, and so it's going to happen. But I'm learning about it. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, it was a big deal. To this day, I will sell more units of audiobooks than print on demand.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's great. That's what I needed to hear to move me forward. Yeah. Very
awesome,
good.
man. Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you for taking the interest and the time with me on this. The questions I love the questions. It gives me a chance to, instead of just telling the story about multi-level marketing, but to see it in the bigger picture and connect it to other things in our culture. That's what I particularly feel needs to happen, so it can be really properly put in context.
Exactly. Me too. In fact, I'll probably call this episode "The Bigger Picture of MLM," because I really want people to get the bigger picture. So cool. Yeah. All right, folks. Any questions, comments, feedback, I suppose, leave it in the comments section or at sensiblyspeaking.com. And if you are, of course, enjoying my podcast, enjoying my channel, consider supporting me through Patreon. Links all below. And if you only want to do a one-off, of course, you can use PayPal. And the link to that is also in the description section to this video. Thank you very much for your viewership, guys. Thanks for inviting us into your home and listening to us. go on at a mad rate about this. I hope that the lessons you take away from this are useful, and please do spread them around. Because if you found something useful and educational and informative and entertaining about this, maybe other people will too. All right, guys, see you next week. Bye-bye.